Apilgrimageforbrianhaw, a spiritual journey of relevance, from the ruins of Barking Abbey to Canterbury Cathedral by Lee D. Miller. It's me. Right, just got to Island Gardens and we're about to go into Greenwich, day one. The weather was suddenly amazing and we were now in proper summer. The only drawback now was that I thought it may be a touch too hot. Give me a break, you know, I'm English. It's what we do. At least my feet felt okay, I thought, and I was glad that I'd caught them just in time and before any real damage had been done. I finished lunch, put on my backpack and proceeded to cross the River Thames by journeying down the stones of the Greenwich foot tunnel to a depth of 50 foot beneath the riverbed. I remember as a boy being first brought along this way by my dad. What an adventure! And running along the first part of the tunnel and pretending it was like I was in one of the space fighters being launched from the 1970s version of Battlestar Galactica. It really has that feel about it, and I have to admit, even to this day, and when no one's looking, I still do. Then I remembered climbing up the stairs on the other side to be greeted by the wonderful and inspiring sight that is the Cutty Sark. What a beautiful ship. When I exited on this day, however, that beautiful ship was, for the most part, dismantled and hidden due to the ongoing restoration work, I guess, so that it would be in tip-top shape and ready for the London Olympics. It was a shame, at least for me on this day. "Hello, Cutty Sark," I said in my head as I passed. I'm going to say that again. "Hello, Cutty Sark," I said in my head as I passed. As I walked by, and after transferring the Victorian tunnel, I had the thought to check in the tourist office in order to make sure of my route along the Thames pathway. It was lucky that I did so because they informed me that there was a partial closure to the path and that there was a marked diversion in place. I continued walking by the side of the River Thames, passing pubs full of tourists, enjoying the sunshine on their Saturday afternoon, and tried to follow the diversion as best I could. The signage was, to be frank, quite terrible in places, and I wasted a little bit of time trying to follow them while consulting my map. I decided that this was becoming quite ridiculous, and I resolved to walk directly across North Greenwich, cutting out the path around the Millennium Dome and rejoining the Thames on the other side of the Inland Peninsula. There was a cycle route heading in that direction, so I followed it and it led me across the busy A102 by footbridge. After initial reprieve, my feet had started to feel troublesome again, and I was pleased to think that this route would actually be saving me a mile or so. It was feeling terribly hot in the sun, and I was beginning to perspire quite heavily. Great Britain was now in the midst of a heatwave. Well, it could be worse, I thought. Better than rain, I guessed, and then realised that I was being ever so English again. As I continued onwards, and in order to rejoin the Thames, I walked through an estate of low-rise new builds. They were exactly the same kind of construction which now, in my opinion, littered Barking. All the so-called advancements in our civilization, all the investment and all the architectural schools, and this is what they come up with. Cheap Lego houses, multicoloured boxes, it's everywhere. One of these structures in Barking actually won a European Architectural Award. The question I asked myself in that moment, who's judging? I thought about a seminar I attended in Hungary a couple of years before, whereby I actually had the opportunity to walk around and see the beautiful city of Budapest. When I was there, it was clear that there was much investment in the city going on, as new buildings were being erected in places and some of the main streets were being completely refurbished. What struck me at the time was how aesthetic all these new buildings were and how they were in keeping with what already existed. Budapest is such a beautiful city. At every turn I found myself stopping and looking with awe sometimes at the truly inspirational architecture. To behold the buildings raised my spirits and lifted my soul. And I thought that's what should be the measurement of truly good architecture, how much it inspired and touched you. As I walked through the north part of Greenwich, I looked up on these new builds with a feeling of resentment. How can my beautiful country be turned into this, I thought. It all looked tidy enough, but that's the best I could say for it. There was no character, no personality, no feeling of life, and most definitely no inspiration. Not for me anyway. To me, they were equivalent of a flat pack chipboard chest of drawers compared to a cabinet made from solid oak and by a master craftsman. Okay, there may well be people out there who think that these kind of structures are fantastic to look at, even to live in. In fact, I'm sure there are, but all I can say to those people is, where's your imagination? I exit the estate or complex by the Greenwich Ecological Park and by some other new builds that I thought looked quite exceptional in their design, and quite frankly I wouldn't have minded living in myself. They were very modern looking, but also had the feel of the natural environment about them, and so fitted quite well into the landscape within the immediate vicinity of an ecological park. It's all subjective, I guess, but I thought, why can't there be more new buildings with this kind of imagination? If there were, I wouldn't be at all bothered. My attention then switched back to my feet. They were actually becoming quite painful. I could feel them blistering. I could feel that blisters had begun to form on the balls of the heels. And as a way of compensating, I'd been walking with an action that had actually distributed more of my weight around the other areas of my feet, specifically on the sides and more to the front. The thing was, owing to the poor quality of my footwear, these areas had also begun to become inflamed and was starting to feel sore too. I'm in trouble, man. I'm in real trouble, I thought to myself. I stopped at the ecological park building and used the toilet facilities to freshen up. Because I had been walking for most of the day thus far along the streets and by the traffic, I started to feel quite suffocated by all the fumes. My exposed skin even felt quite dirty, as if it had the residues of pollution on it. I was glad to have a quick wash and felt quite energised afterwards, but I was also extremely concerned at the state of my feet. No doubt about it, they were hurting, and I couldn't see that they were going to get any better. I went back outside and sat on a bench to rest and examine them again. They really wasn't looking good either. Wait for this to pass, eh? There we go, she can sort of drink then. They really weren't looking good either. The soles looked very pink in places and red in others, and I could see that fluid had formed underneath the skin on the bottom of my heels. I was starting to feel a lot of discomfort, and I knew now that this was going to be a serious problem. I was really angry with myself. Well done, Lee. Fucking idiot. I thought to myself, you ruined this now, haven't you? Bloody ruined it. If it's like this now, what's it going to be like later, eh? What's been going on? What's it going to be like? Fucking prick. Yeah, right now there's a good... Yeah, right. Now there's a good idea, mate. Wear your old Kibit shoes all the way to Canterbury. Yeah, fucking top drawer, mate. Great idea, well done. Fucking swat, what a grenade. I really gave myself a bollocking. I realised that I was in so much trouble. I continued to give myself a talking to, but decided that it would be okay, and that all I really needed to do was put some extra padding in my shoes. Improvised, and I thought that some cardboard would do the trick. So I put my shoes back on, carried on walking with one eye out for the salvation of a cardboard box. Now the thing is, as I've grown up in London, I've noted that there is always copious amounts of rubbish littering the streets. That being so, I thought I would easily come across an appropriate piece of clean cardboard that would suffice and adequately be adapted to a new life in the soles of my shoes. But could I bollocks? It was amazing. All the way along the entire length of the pathway by the Thames from where I was to the Woolwich ferry, I didn't come across hardly any litter of the kind that I could reasonably use and apply. I walked past numerous public areas and still nothing. And meanwhile it was getting hotter and hotter and my feet were ripping into more and more pieces. The pain was starting to become quite intense. It was during this section and before I reached the Thames barrier that I began to think to myself, if Brian Haw can endure 10 years of his life in Parliament Square in all weathers and for what he believed in, then you can endure this. It's not a problem. Keep walking. Every step I took was starting to become excruciating, and because the whole of the bottom of both of my feet were now suffering, there was no way I could compensate in any way. Going to add this in, it felt like I broke my rib. Twice I broke the rib. when you break your rib, you wake up at night, but you turn, you get this sharp pain. It was like that with every step, I'm telling you. Just added that in. And just idea, but this was meant to happen, I think. It was a test. I stopped every couple of 100 yards to take a short reprieve and to turn to take a look back at the view from whence I'd come. Back along the river and to the skyline that was created by the Millennium Dome and Canary Wharf. For me, it was really was a mesmerising scene, and I love looking back upon it. The sky was so blue around, and the sun reflected off the glass of the buildings and sparkled off the river. The grey and brown buildings indiscriminately aligning the sides of the river, and the haphazard boats dotted upon it helped to create a strangely captivating scene. It certainly was helping to take my mind off this discomfort I was experiencing, and it did look beautiful in a modern and unnatural kind of way. It was the pain each time I always took my weight which was the real problem though, and I knew that if I didn't get the situation remedied in some way, then that pain was only going to get worse. If Brian Haw can endure 10 years in Parliament Square in all weathers for what he believed in, you can endure this, mate. I continued to rally myself in order to keep myself going. In fact, it was getting to a point where the thoughts I was having were connected to my feet and Brian Haw. I continued to rally myself in order to keep myself going. In fact, it was getting to the point where the only thoughts I was having were connected to my feet and Brian Haw. Just as I passed Woolwich Ferry, I finally came across some usable cardboard. It was a used and surprisingly clean 7-inch pizza box. I found a bench in a little park along the way and began to attend to my feet once more. My God, the bliss when I took my shoes off my feet and the weight was finally removed from them. It was approaching the latter part of the afternoon and was still very hot, but it was nice to sit there and take in a little bit of breeze. It's always cooler sitting by a river. I took the box and found my Swiss Army knife, or should more accurately describe as my multi-purpose knife made by High Gear. Then I began to shape the box accordingly. I figured 2 layers should be enough, so I doubled the cardboard over and shaped the heels appropriately. I slotted the inner soles in between the cardboard and then I placed them back in the shoes. And Robert, your father's brother, we had lift off. I noticed that I got a number of strange looks from people passing by as I was doing this, but what was their problem? Had they never seen a man cutting up a pizza box, carefully shaping them and placing them in the shoes before? I jest because it was understandable, but I didn't care and continued to put my shoes back on and proceed to try them out. Top drawer, I thought, as I took some strides up and down. They really appeared to make a difference. It was still painful, but pretty bearable, so I was quite happy and ready to move on again. I continued to have the thoughts about Brian and felt that as long as I could see the day through, then I could think about sorting out the shoe situation tomorrow. I started to formulate a plan and thought that as soon as I made it to Dartford, I could phone my mum, and seeing as Barking was only 20 minutes away from Dartford, being just down the A13 and across the Dartford Bridge, it wouldn't be that much of a drama for her to bring me my hiking shoes so that I could continue. There was no way I could carry on with what I was presently wearing, and the exchange wouldn't take me off course in any way. It was a shame that I wasn't going to be able to go all the way to Canterbury in my Holy Land work shoes, but I guess this must have been happening for a reason. So much for the sentiment though. Just after you pass Woolwich Ferry, you walk through a place called Woolwich Arsenal, or the Royal Arsenal Woolwich, depending on how posh you think you are. It's a very interesting place and was once the site of armament manufacturer, of ammunition proofing and of explosive research for the British Army. Most of it is now being used for residential purposes, but as I reached there, I was struck for the second time that day by the symbolic nature to my pilgrimage of something I was passing, and although already knowing it was there, I hadn't thought about it during the planning of my route. This was a place where bombs had been made, bombs that had gone around the world causing so much damage and destruction, bombs that killed, bombs that maimed, bombs that showed no discretion and no compassion, bombs of the like that Brian Haw has spent the best part of his life protesting against. To be honest, I'd like to say that in that moment of realisation I sent love out to the world and said a prayer of peace, but I didn't. I just stood there looking upon the guns that still remained and thought, what's the point? What's the point in firing a gun at someone? What utter fucking nonsense. I didn't know what else to think, to be fair. Just that. I turned to continue and thought about another historical connection that Woolwich Arsenal had, and you guessed it, it's football related again, I'm afraid. I thought about Arsenal Football Club, which originated from this place before moving to North London and dropping the Woolwich from its name. It's a peculiar history with Arsenal, and one that holds a strange resonance with me for everyday life. The season after Arsenal moved across the water, 1914 to 15, they finished 5th in the English 2nd Division, yet somehow managed to get elected into the English 1st Division in the season following the First World War, when the Football League recommenced. You'll notice that I said elected and not promoted, for to be promoted would indicate that this somehow happened by sporting achievement and fair play. This was not the case, however. What happened has less to do with sport and more to do with politicking, and no doubt the exchange of money. But it doesn't end there. Arsenal FC also holds an even more peculiar record of never have been relegated from the 1st Division, now the Premiership, in all of its history after being promoted. It is, in fact, the only football club which can boast of such a thing. So basically, after gaining entry to the top flight of English football by unsporting means, Arsenal was never left. I was thinking about this as I continued and thought, what's the moral story? The only thing I could come up with was that sometimes in life, cheaters do prosper. But I really wasn't happy with that thought. It's not right, and it's not the world I want to live in. In fact, it was the very thing I realised in that moment that I'd spent most of my life in my own way trying to remedy and eradicate, from working on the estates with young people to just trying to protect treat people decently and fairly in my everyday life. I hate cheating, and I hate even more the fact that there are some people who appear to benefit greatly from being underhand. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that it's not right, it's not fair, and it has to stop. I'd actually got myself quite worked up, and then I wondered to myself, why have you just got yourself wound up by the thought of cheaters and liars, but 5 minutes earlier you were thinking about bombs and destruction, and ultimately of their consequences, which is killing. Yet you didn't have the same kind of reaction. It was an interesting question to pose to myself, and I took a few moments to ponder it. I struggled for an answer, I have to be honest. I didn't know with absolution. I have unfortunately experienced the effects of a bomb, but not its power of destruction firsthand, and I hope I never do. I have, however, experienced intense injustice from foul play and dishonesty, and so I thought that maybe this was the answer to my question, the sense of emotional attachment to the thought I'd had. I was reasonably happy with the explanation that I'd given to myself, but was also consciously aware that the destruction and indiscriminate killing caused by bombs must be amongst the most unjust acts known to the human race. It's sickening, and in that thought, maybe I'd just stumbled across another explanation for the apathy I felt whilst looking at the guns. Maybe they were just too insane to fully contemplate. I continued walking, in bearable, intense pain, with the cardboard doing a reasonably good job at softening the impact of my heel on the pavement as I stepped, until I reached the part of the Thames path that was at a point almost directly opposite to Barking on the other side of the water. It was quite a peaceful area, so I decided that this would be a good time to take another break, and I found a spot by the river in the shade and under some trees. I sat down, taking my shoes off once more. What a relief. As I looked across the river, I could see some of the taller buildings in Barking, and I was amazed to see how close the town was to the Thames. It was only a mile or so away, and yet in all my time growing up there, the Thames played no real part in my life. It's absurd really, only living a short distance from one of the biggest rivers in England and rarely seeing it, never thinking of it, and not even realising how close it actually was. It may as well not have even been there, so little relevance it had played in my day-to-day life growing up. It wasn't always like that in Barking, and I've recalled that Barking was once one of the biggest fishing ports in England, and as recently as just a century and a half ago. I thought back to how the world used to be back then, when the rivers were the main focus of human societies and the lifeblood of our civilisations in many ways. I looked further down the river and saw the Barking Barrier standing tall further along. The barrier is the flood defence for the River Roding, and I wondered what the scene would have looked like over 100 years ago. I thought that if I had lived in the days of my great nan, then the river would have played a bigger role in my life, either via work in the great docks of London or through what was left of the fishing fleet at Barking. I then remembered an amusing incident that had happened to me in Cornwall a couple of years before, and I giggled to myself at the memory. For a brief period in 2008-2009, I lived in Cornwall and had gotten involved in the indigenous sport of Cornish pilot boat gig racing. It's a fantastic rowing sport, with many of the seaside communities in Cornwall having their own team and boathouse. Throughout the summer months and all around Cornwall, gig regattas are held almost every weekend, and they are fabulous events. It's an amazing sport, and one which literally brings the whole community together, because all age groups participate, from youth level to that of veterans. Not only that, but it's also a means by which a very Cornish tradition has been kept alive. Gig pilot boat racing originates from the days when the sea was the main means of trade and transport around the world, and in a time when local knowledge of the hazardous shoreline was essential. As ships approached port, they required a pilot to enable them a safe passage, and this is where the tradition of gig boats developed from. They are hardy boats built for speed and manned by 6 oarsmen and a cox. As the ship came into view of an anchorage, gangs of men assigned to their own boat would race out to rendezvous the ship. The first pilot reaching the deck of a ship gained the commission and the right to pilot the ship into harbour, and so earning the money. It was big business, and the best crew won. Anyway, on this particular Saturday we didn't have a regatta, and so few of us went out to train in a gig boat. The truth was, although we did train for a while, the real reason for our voyage was to spend the afternoon fishing out past the headland. Naughty naughty, slap on the wrist. As everyone cast their lines overboard, I borrowed my rod off one of the lads. Steino, a middle-aged Cornish fisherman who was the cox and one of my very good friends, said to me, "You ever fished before, Lee?" "Yeah, a bit on a lake, but never at sea," I replied. And this was the cue for Steino to start having a proper dig at me. "Ah, you bloody Londoners. You ain't got a clue, have you? You can't fish. Here, put the rod down and just watch everyone else, because you're wasting your time," he said in his Cornish accent while poking fun at me. I did try the Cornish thing, I can't even do my own accent. Well, funny you should say that, Steino, because Barking, where I'm from, used to be the biggest fishing port in England. "Fishing's in my blood, mate," I said as a way of defending myself and deflecting the banter. Oh, you should have heard the derision. "Oh, shut up. You expect me to believe that, you cockney twat?" Steino continued to proceed to slate me, along with the enthusiastic assistance of the rest of the lads. "I'm telling you, it's true. I'll show you, you bunch of Cornish merchant bankers," I said, metaphorically sticking my chest out. "Fish is in your blood. Do me a favour, you cockney prick." "I bet you don't even catch a fish today," he said, half in jest and half in prophecy. And he was right, I didn't. But nor did anyone else for that matter, except for Steino, of course, who annoyingly caught 2. But he gave them both to me. As we went back to the shore, I continued to take abuse from all the lads, and I thought to myself, "All right, you bunch of cockney wankers, I'll show you." I wasn't going to take this one lying down. After the boat was safely put away and stored in the boathouse, all the lads went into the pub, and I shot across to an office I had access to. I went onto the internet and did a quick Google search related to Barking and its fishing history, and would you add believe it, the local paper in the previous month and in May 2009, I think it's the Barking and Dagenham Post, had done a big article on Barking and its fishing heritage, and even more unbelievably, the headline of the story declared, "Barking, biggest fishing fleet in the world." It went on to say that by the mid-19th century, the Barking fishing fleet consisted of over 220 fishing smacks, and that almost every family in Barking was involved in the fishing industry in one way or another. Top drawer, I thought. Then I printed it out and went running back to the pub and entered with a big smirk on my face. I saw Steino with the rest of the lads and announced, "Steino, I was wrong, mate. I'm really sorry. Barking wasn't the biggest fishing port in England after all. It was the biggest one in the world." I broadcast at the top of my voice while putting the printed copy of the article in his face. "You bunch of Cornish wankers." I then declared with a booming voice and with the biggest smile I could have ever mustered, "Have some of that," I thought. Knockout punch, bang, job done. Stano grabbed the article and read it in disbelief. He was lost for words, and I don't think he ever recovered. He certainly gave me a dig about fishing again. I must have looked a right idiot sitting there laughing to myself, like I'm now. But I didn't care. It was such a fond memory, and I went on to remember participating in the Great River Race with the gig club later the same year. That was a great day too, and lots of fun, rowing up the Thames from Millwall to Ham. But again, it highlighted absolute disconnection. Sorry, I'll read that again. That was a great day too, and lots of fun, rowing up the Thames from Millwall to Ham, Richmond area. But again, it highlighted the absolute disconnection myself and most people from East London seem to now have from the River Thames. The Great River Race has been running for over 20 years and is a massive annual event with over 300 boats involved and around 2,500 people participating. It is reputably the single biggest event of its kind in Europe, yet until I got involved in gig racing in Cornwall, I had never heard of it. And neither, I must add, had anyone I knew in East London. As I sat there reminiscing and wondering what the scene would have looked like in times gone by, I felt a great kind of sadness for the connection that had been lost. I suddenly felt subdued. I looked across the river, collected my thoughts, collected my things, and pressed on. Alright, I think that's a moment to end that part. Alright. Lots of love. God bless you, Brian.